किसी के एक वीडियो फॉरवर्ड से, क्योंकि ऐसे अफवाहें फैलाने वाले झूठे वीडियोस ने दिल्ली में दंगों को भड़का।
पार्टिकल्स ईंटों से सरिये तक जोड़कर घर को दे बेजोड़ मजबूती।
नींव बिछाई, दीवार चढ़ाई।
Sizzle. Build. Create.
These are extraordinary.
Just a little bit does you.
Drizzle. Play. Stretch.
Ever in Australia, and the Australian growth-sensitive dollar also fell to a 17-year low. Now, in South Korea, the government announced a range of fiscal measures to try and prop up the economy. Now, this wasn't just the first package. It announced some funds earlier as crisis funds, but today the full fiscal package now for South Korea trying to prop up the economy is worth around $39 billion.
But Sarah, as far as those crucial markets are concerned, clearly they want confidence. Clearly they're not going to get it. But this time last week, when we were discussing here on Al Jazeera, cutting interest rates doesn't work. That's what some analysts were telling us. Also, liquidity, printing money, literally putting cash into the system, doesn't work. So the markets just have to ride this, yeah?
Yes, certainly it does. Cash is king at the moment, as some economists are saying, and other countries that are now trying and curb the spread of the virus and also trying to prop up their economies in doing so. We've got the Australian and New Zealand governments. Both of them have today announced that the closure of borders for foreigners. Now, these particular deadlines, it's Friday 9 p.m. in Australia and Thursday midnight, so all non-residents won't be able to enter those countries from today and tomorrow. Now, this travel ban means that only the Australian residents and citizens can enter, and this is what the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison has said. 80% of the cases, so more than 3/4 of the cases, are coming from overseas. And as a result, he's trying to stop the spread because at the moment Australia is spreading quite rapidly. These are some of the toughest measures that we've had, certainly in Australia. And New Zealand made the announcement about closing its borders about 30 minutes after. So clearly it's a united effort from both Australia and New Zealand. And earlier today we had Qantas announcing that it would stop all international flights at the end of the month.
Always pause for a world weather forecast with Jenny. Bit wet, bit windy across our region, Jenny.
It has been. You're right, Peter. We were just saying, weren't we? It's been a bit cooler than normal, and certainly we've had quite a bit of rain as well. Let me tell you why and show you what's been going on, because really it's been about these systems to the north, which actually have had a big spread further to the south. But in particular, the area that's really been impacted is actually northern Iraq, in particular Mosul. 127 millimetres of rain in just 24 hours. The really heavy rain began Tuesday night, continued through Wednesday. And this is the result. This is what 127 millimetres does in such a short space of time. Now, the average rainfall for the entire month of March is only 63 millimetres. So this is literally double that amount. So no surprising at all that we've seen flooding pictures like that. Now, there is some more rain in the forecast throughout Friday. It's not going to be as heavy, but of course, all of this rain is going to come down on those flooded streets and those flooded areas. And then we've also got areas of rain elsewhere. We've got some rain showers into the far southwest of Saudi, down across into Yemen. And also you'll see here through the eastern end of the Med, it has been very unsettled for several days. The temperatures are well below the average and the rain just doesn't really disappear. In fact, as we go through Saturday, it expands further, pushing down into northern Saudi. And look at all this moisture here. It's western and southern areas of Iran where we're going to really see some big accumulations, very strong winds, and this rain will spread further south. So we're likely to see rain across once again into areas of Qatar. So temperatures are lower, just 24 Celsius there in Doha. But as I say, the really cool air, that's in the eastern end of the Med. So not a good time of the year, Peter.
Jenny, many thanks. Talk to you later. Still to come here on the News Hour for you, to Yemen, a country already struggling with a 5-year-long war. Now comes the battle against coronavirus. Also ahead, holidaying students flouting calls to avoid large gatherings despite the dire health warnings. In sport, an Olympic ceremony with a difference. No spectators are allowed as the torch is handed over to organisers of the Tokyo Games.
The grim consequences of Mexico's bloody drug wars.
Watch the people around you, Mr. Governor. You've got people who are with the narco.
Through the eyes of the journalists, determined to report the truth.
Your government is full of narco, she said. That's how the article should start.
6 years on, we revisit the reporters still risking their lives.
Lately, there's been another outbreak of violence, of murders.
Rewind the deadliest beat on Al Jazeera.
When diplomacy fails and fear sweeps in.
And our borders are wide open. They're wide open to drugs, terrorists, we've proven that.
Barriers are built to impose division.
It's not effective. Instead of being an obstacle to terrorists, it became another obstacle to peace.
In a 4-part series, Al Jazeera revisits the reasons for divisions in different parts of the world and the impact they have on both sides. Walls of Shame on Al Jazeera.
Welcome back. You're watching the Al Jazeera News Hour live from Doha. I'm Peter Dobby. Your main stories so far. Italy's Prime Minister says lockdown measures due to the coronavirus outbreak will be extended past the April the 3rd deadline. On Wednesday, the country recorded the highest single-day number of deaths from the virus since the outbreak began. Malaysia has put 31 million people under a partial lockdown until the end of the month. The government says it could deploy the army to enforce the measures. The country has reported 2 deaths and 900 infections. China, meanwhile, easing some of its restrictions after no new homegrown infections were reported on Wednesday. All new cases were people returning home from other countries. OK, that's the picture across Asia and across Europe. Let's go to the US. President Donald Trump has signed into law a relief package that promises free testing for anyone who needs it. All 50 states have now reported coronavirus cases. Mr. Trump was also questioned about labeling the illness a Chinese virus. Mike Hanna has more.
The actual vote took longer than usual. Senators entering the chamber a few at a time to ensure social distance was maintained. Within hours of the bill being passed, it was signed into law by President Trump. A total of about $100 billion earmarked for bolstering unemployment benefits, guaranteeing free testing, and providing some American workers with paid sick leave. Earlier, President Trump told reporters he was invoking the rarely used Defense Production Act.
Right after I'm finished with this conference, I'll be signing it. It's prepared to go.
The law allows the administration to expand production and access reserves of protective gear like masks and ventilators.
The first 1 million masks will be available immediately.
The military will also deploy 2 floating hospital ships to increase hospital capacity as the coronavirus spreads to all 50 of U.S. states. The White House is urging Congress to pass more legislative packages in the days ahead, seeking a total of about $1 trillion to flood the U.S. economy with cash. The stated intention to ease the burden of big businesses as well as provide financial relief to each citizen. Some Democrats continue to insist the overall response is still too slow.
We're behind the 8 ball on tests, and we're soon going to be behind the 8 ball on ICU beds and ventilators as more and more people get sick. The administration didn't pay attention to tests, and now we're paying the price.
Chinese virus.
In the midst of all this, President Trump is insisting on calling the coronavirus the Chinese virus, even as reporters asked whether he was being racist.
It's not racist at all, no, not at all. It comes from China. That's why.
It's a posture Trump insists is appropriate, given he sees himself as,
in a sense, a wartime president.
A president who believes he's leading the fight against what he calls America's increasingly virulent, invisible enemy. Mike Hanna, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Meanwhile, conflicting guidance from the Trump administration over the coronavirus outbreak is forcing more state governors and local officials to act on their own in the fight against the pandemic. Rob Reynolds reports from Los Angeles.
Lines of fear. People in Los Angeles queue up at a discount grocery store, stocking up on supplies to ride out the coronavirus pandemic. It's a sight that has grown common across the U.S. California has been hard hit by the virus, with hundreds of confirmed cases and more than a dozen deaths. Governor Gavin Newsom was among the first state executives to order drastic steps.
We are calling for the home isolation of all seniors in the state of California. We are directing that all bars, nightclubs, wineries, brew pubs, and the like be closed in the state of California.
State officials have ordered residents of at least 10 California counties to shelter in place, remaining at home except for essential errands. That's more than 8 million people, including the cities of San Francisco and Sacramento. In neighboring Nevada, Governor Steve Sisolak ordered a month-long halt to gambling, shutting down the glittering casinos of the Las Vegas Strip. It's a heavy blow to the state's tourism-centered economy, but Sisolak justified the closure, saying people are dying.
This is not the time for casinos to remain open. This is not the time for community recreation centers, clubhouses, movie theaters, and malls to remain open. If your business brings groups of people together, it should not be open.
Public health officials say social distancing is essential to saving lives, but some governors haven't got the message. Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt tweeted a picture of himself with his children in a crowded restaurant, writing, "It's packed tonight," with a hashtag #SupportLocal. After intense criticism, Stitt removed the post and declared a state of emergency in Oklahoma. California Governor Newsom acknowledges the people of his state must endure tough times.
We need to meet this moment head on and lean in. Not isolate ourselves to this moment, but lean in and own this moment.
With the world's 5th largest economy, California faces staggering economic losses due to the pandemic. But stringent measures taken now may prevent the virus from doing its worst. Rob Reynolds, Al Jazeera, Los Angeles.
Well, in Indonesia, a big religious event has been cancelled by the authorities because of the coronavirus outbreak. Despite this, thousands of people still gathered near the venue. Jessica Washington is following developments from the capital, Jakarta.
Local authorities never gave permission for this event to go ahead, but regardless, we know that at least 8,000 people showed up in South Sulawesi. Not just Indonesians, but many from countries abroad, including the Philippines, Thailand, and even Brunei and Timor-Leste. What we know is that this event never had permission to go ahead. We did see some scenes overnight of people crowding into this shared tent space. It's an incredibly dangerous event and really did put people at risk. And authorities never gave permission for this event to go ahead. We know now that they have finally convinced the organisers to call it off, but it may be too late. People have already gathered. There are thousands there who will now make the journey back home. The military will escort them to make sure that that process is as orderly as possible. But this is the same group that organised the gathering in Malaysia, which did cause a huge spike in cases. The concern is now that the same will happen here in Indonesia. We have heard consistent messaging from authorities that these events should be cancelled, but as we speak, there's another event going on in West Flores for the ordination of their new bishop. We've heard around 4,000 to 5,000 people are gathering there. Authorities there are trying to temperature check the crowds, but of course, any mass gatherings are incredibly risky right now.
Well, Thailand's infamous nightlife is also feeling the effects of the coronavirus. The government's ordered the closure of all bars and entertainment venues in the capital. With few tourists, huge numbers of workers who have informal jobs have lost their incomes. Wayne Hay reports now from Bangkok.
Outside one of Bangkok's famous Thai boxing stadiums, a makeshift coronavirus testing clinic has been set up. It's for fighters, spectators and anyone else who was here in recent days as the number of cases surged in Thailand, including a cluster at another boxing stadium across town. The Prime Minister has ordered entertainment venues and bars to close for 2 weeks.
The government will keep evaluating the outbreak situation both in the country and internationally, as well as its economic impact, closely and carefully.
The virus, at an icon of Thai culture, may remove any lingering complacency about a crisis that could deliver an economic knockout. Thailand's economy was already struggling after a coup and 5 years of military rule. Last year's election did little, if anything, to brighten the outlook, and this situation will almost certainly send it into recession. Coronavirus and the measures to contain it have altered the economic and social landscape of Bangkok, particularly its notorious nightlife, one of the most vibrant in the world. The government order to close bars came when business was already dramatically declining, partly because tourist arrivals are down almost 77% this year. Bar owners are worried the enforced closures could be extended.
In the worst scenarios, we need to close the business. Yeah, like no choice. But on this time, we try to survive. We still have staff. We have our employees that they still need to pay for the rent, for the living, for take care of their family. So we try our best to take care of them.
There is no management taking care of the more vulnerable, the 21 million Thais who have informal jobs such as street food vendors, many of whom are already struggling to survive.
My business is getting worse and worse. I don't know if they will shut Bangkok down or not. But if they do, we are in trouble because we won't have money or food if we stay at home.
Thailand's economy has been resilient in the past and traditionally bounces back quickly from major setbacks. This evolving shock to an already vulnerable system will test that resilience like never before. Wayne Hay, Al Jazeera, Bangkok.
Well, as countries around the world enforce strict measures to tackle the pandemic, the coronavirus outbreak, the health crisis is posing an even greater challenge for countries at war, such as Yemen. Schools are closed and they've added other restrictions, and they are being enforced as well. Mohammed Al-Attab reports now from the capital, Sana'a.
This is Sana'a International Airport, once a busy hub serving much of Yemen. It has been largely closed for the past 4 years because of the conflict. Only recently were UN and other humanitarian flights allowed, but now, with the spread of coronavirus, those two have been suspended.
The country's Supreme Committee assigned for eradicating the world's growing pandemic issued a set of resolutions to stem the spread of the disease from outside Yemen. Now, all UN and humanitarian passenger flights have been suspended until further notice.
A month ago, the World Health Organization airlifted critically ill patients to Jordan. The airport's general manager told Al Jazeera only humanitarian cargo is now allowed in.
Sana'a International Airport has applied the same precautionary measures that are being carried out all over the world. Now we are assigned to only allow flights of humanitarian aid and life-saving medicines. These shipments will be kept untouched at our airport's warehouses for 24 hours before any further action is taken.
Houthis later have also ordered the closure of schools. That's despite confirmation from the WHO that Yemen doesn't have a single case of coronavirus.
The closure of the school is a precautionary measure in case the situation gets worse. Similar decision has been taken during the beginning of Saudi-led war over the spike of its airstrikes.
Some of the students we spoke to at Sana'a University are not happy about having to abandon their education before an important exam. They are already struggling because of the 5-year Saudi Emirati-led war, and there is no opportunity for distance learning.
Studies has been suspended until further notice as we are just days away from completing our second semester.
Despite the absence of any coronavirus cases here in Sana'a or elsewhere in Yemen, prices for masks have soared and their availability has started to dwindle.
We used to buy this bucket before the pandemic by $0.6. But now, after the pandemic, the package equal $6.
The short supply of protective gear is not the only challenge for the authorities here. Testing kits for coronavirus are also scarce.
We only have 400 corona tests at the Central Medical Labs, so we're urging international organizations to step in and provide the necessary aid that'll help us eradicate the threat of the virus in its early stages.
This internally displaced family, which is forced to live in this 3-square-meter shop, has prioritized giving the children masks. Experts warn if coronavirus cases started to emerge here, the death toll could be the highest in the world. Yemen has already struggled to contain the outbreaks of cholera, diphtheria and H1N1 flu virus that have resulted in the deaths of thousands of civilians. They say Yemenis simply cannot afford a global pandemic. Mohammed Al-Attab, Al Jazeera, Sana'a.
The government in Chile has declared a state of emergency after the total number of infections there reached 238. Our Latin America editor Lucia Newman reports now from Santiago.
Chile marked 5 months of social upheaval and nearly daily protests with almost empty streets as President Sebastián Piñera declared a state of emergency and catastrophe.
This allows us to dictate a series of measures, including restriction of gatherings in public places, assure the distribution of goods and services, and establish quarantines and curfews.
It also means that starting Thursday, the army will be back on the streets, a sensitive decision given their checkered human rights record. About 100 protesters, rather than the usual thousands, answered the call to continue demonstrating around Dignity Plaza, as it's nicknamed. Whether they will defy a likely curfew and the army later this week is not yet clear. Even before the state of emergency was declared, mayors ordered the closure of shopping malls, cinemas, parks, and discotheques. Here in South America's largest mall, only the supermarket and pharmacies remain open. Starting at midnight, the government will be able to intervene to stop hoarding and reselling of key sanitary goods. Some people are making a killing on all these items that people are desperate to buy and can't find in the pharmacies. For example, hand sanitizers, silicone gloves, and especially face masks. Even vitamin C has run out. I'm going to see if I can buy a couple of face masks. ¿No tiene más? No. So she just ran out. 1,000 pesos per mask, which is something like 10 times the normal price. Even the street vendor says more energetic government measures are needed.
In Peru, a curfew has been imposed. That's what we need here too.
In Brazil's capital, the president of the Senate, as well as 3 more cabinet members, tested positive for COVID-19, as the president called for calm.
My obligation as head of state is to anticipate problems, to bring the truth to the Brazilian people, but this truth should not incite panic.
In Chile, people may not be panicking, but they are clearly frightened. Enough to be urging the president to put the entire city in lockdown immediately, rather than when it's too late to prevent a scenario as devastating as that of Italy. Lucia Newman, Al Jazeera, Santiago.
Okay, let's go back to the United States. Crowds of university students in America are celebrating spring break, a tradition at this time of year, at beaches and bars, despite dire health warnings over coronavirus. Many are ignoring instructions to avoid large crowds, potentially putting others at risk. Andy Gallagher is in Miami.
It's a dream destination for millions of tourists and one of Florida's largest employers. Now the streets, rides and car parks of Disney World in Orlando are deserted. The company's now putting its resources behind food distribution, but in other parts of the state, it's a different story. In Miami, university students on their spring break are blatantly ignoring warnings about gathering in large crowds. The governor of Florida has told them to knock it off, but many seem unconcerned about the health risks.
We need a refund. This virus ain't that serious. It's more serious things out there like hunger and poverty, and we need to address that.
What is there to do here other than go to the bars or the beach, and they're closing all of it? It's really messing. I think they're blowing it way out of proportion.
On Florida's west coast too, tourists and locals appear blissfully ignorant of the dangers of the pandemic. The Jordan family, visiting from Tennessee, wrongly believe the whole crisis is a hoax.
There's a lot more people die from the flu and a lot more people die from swine flu than any coronavirus probably will ever kill. Everybody's going to get it eventually. It's a viral infection.
Parts of Miami Beach are now closed, but stiffer measures may be needed. It's hard to believe this far into the crisis there are some that appear unconcerned with the pandemic. While the young are less at risk, they're not exempt. They may not get critically ill, but they could also be carriers for the more vulnerable. Florida thrives on tourism, but the crowds we're seeing here aren't helping. Even President Trump, who until a few days ago was playing down the risks, says young people are taking irresponsible chances.
We don't want them gathering. They do gather, including on beaches and including in restaurants, young people. They don't realize that they're feeling invincible. I don't know if you felt invincible when you were very young, but they were feeling totally invincible or are feeling that way, but they don't realize that they can be carrying lots of bad things home to grandmother and grandfather and even their parents.
Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis has warned people not to gather in groups of more than 10. It's a warning that few here seem to be heeding. Andy Gallagher, Al Jazeera, Miami, Florida.
OK, time for the sports news on the other side of the break. The clay court tennis season is officially over. Before it began, Sana is here with that story when we come back.